Hi there, I'm Adam Leventhal. Welcome to the Athletic FC. Today we're going to be assessing what we've learned from the opening 3 match days of the season. And with me to do that are 2 learned men. Tim Spiers, how are you?
I'm excellent. How are you?
I'm very well. Have you enjoyed the opening phase of the season? Are you frustrated that we've hit an international break straight away?
Yeah, it does feel too soon. Although I enjoyed San Marino v Liechtenstein last night.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
That's what we're all here for.
Yeah, every cloud, actually. Yeah, it was a lovely story, wasn't it? I was really glad that they won a game. John Mackenzie is here as well. What have you made in general of the first 30 games of the season? Just answer that in one question if you can.
Yeah, which I've watched every single one,
of course.
But yeah, it's good. It's nice to have the raw material for my job back, right? So I can talk about things that have happened rather than things that might happen. So yeah. All good.
Liverpool, 3 wins from 3, yet to concede a goal this season. Let's start off with Liverpool. Reflect on that victory over Manchester United as well. You got the score bang on, Tim. A 3-0 win for Liverpool. And I do want to actually fight both of your corners, if you will let me.
Okay.
Because there was a little bit of beef coming our way that we were being too pro-Liverpool and a little bit too negative on United ahead of the game. You can listen back to it if you want. But you both got it bang on. You predicted, obviously, the score right. You both predicted that Liverpool were going to win. And it did pan out, as you were both saying, that Liverpool were on point and United looked like they've got a lot of issues still. You should be proud of yourself, Tim.
Oh, thanks. I didn't see any beef. A little bit of beef, as you say. I didn't see any.
I always see the beef.
Do you do that?
Yeah.
You delve in, do you?
I delve into.
Is that you being protective of us?
Yeah, I I want to protect you guys because I know that your integrity is on the line a lot. So I just wanted to check out what people were saying.
Yeah, I guess it wasn't hard to predict that United would have a meltdown. They'd had one a few days earlier, and they were prone to them last year. I guess we'd seen it all before from both teams to an extent, right? Over last season. So similar players, only one different manager. It's not a completely unexpected result. Certainly seen it all before from United in terms of those utterly horrific defensive mistakes and Casemiro and gaps in defence and vulnerable to a press. And but I did expect more in terms of a fight from United. They had elements of control in those first 2 games of the season and looked slightly more normal, apart from the defensive mishaps. So they had the worst defensive record for decades last season under the same manager. The same manager was rewarded with a new contract, and despite the fact that they've won 2 trophies in the past. As he's very keen to tell everybody. Yeah,
what do you make of that? Because that's his default defence mechanism, and he got some beef from a reporter basically saying, "Look, come on, you're not going anywhere. This isn't improving." And he did try and fight back with, "But we've won 2 trophies." It
was a really odd exchange. He got facts from a reporter. It wasn't like it was an argument. The reporter just laid out the team's many deficiencies. And he looked lost, Ten Hag. All he could say was, it was quite pathetic, really. All he could say was, "Well, I won 2 trophies, so shut up. I'm sorry for your opinion," which is just nonsense. And it's not the only time he said this. Mark Critchley wrote an article this week saying, look, he's been saying this all throughout pre-season as well and during the season, that started pointing to his record. And he did it immediately after the cup final. If you remember, he went on the offensive with Gary Lineker and Alan Shearer on the pitch, kind of saying, well, you've been slagging me off all year, but look at this. So that's not going to last for too long. But, United have backed him. They've given him a new contract. They've given him the signings that he wanted. He's got half the Ajax team from 2019 now. There's only Ryan Babel left to sign, but I think he's retired. So I don't know where he's going to turn next. So he's running out of excuses, really. The international break came at a really good time for him.
Are there any easy fixes for United? And I know we were going to talk about Liverpool, and we've switched very much into United, but it looks as if Liverpool are a cohesive unit, whilst United have still got a lot of things that they can sort out. Can he sort them out easily with the personnel and with his tactical nous?
Do you know what's really interesting is that I saw a lot of people criticising the defensive structure of Manchester United and just the general identity of tactical identity of Manchester United, which is always easy to do in hindsight after a game like that. But actually, if you compare what Manchester United are trying to do with what Liverpool are trying to do, there's a lot of similarities. So in terms of defensive structure, both teams with like minor tweaks, almost identical. And I saw people online saying, "Oh, you can't play this 4-2-4 shape. You're just going to get pulled apart." But there's evidence of Liverpool making the same mistakes as Manchester United out of possession. Manchester United didn't capitalise on those moments, and there's a few moments they had where they could have capitalised on them and didn't.
But why are they not? Is it it via the coaching? Is it via the triggers, the sort of awareness that they're not being pointed in the right direction ultimately?
Yeah, I think there's elements of. I mean, it whenever you're doing an analysis of a game like this, there's so many factors that you have to balance off. You have to ask: is the tactical structure or system that's being used plausible from the outset? Are the players enacting? Are they performing at a level that will allow that structure to work? Or do you think that maybe there's an issue with coaching? Do we think the coaches aren't able to instill the sorts of ideas that the players need in order to be able to get the upside from it? So all of those things have to be percolating around in your head. In terms of of making the most of the mistakes Liverpool were making, you do need to be better in build-up scenarios, and we've seen Manchester United haven't been particularly brilliant in build-up. And I think a better team against Liverpool will start finding their tensions in their defensive structure. So you can argue that both teams are wanting to build up deep and then have these tempo shifts where they find space in behind quickly. Manchester United have been doing that pretty much the whole time under Erik ten Hag. He's talked about wanting to be one of the best transition teams in the world. Liverpool are doing the same thing with Slot, sort of more like De Zerbi, so sit deep, bait pressure in, find space in behind. Liverpool have been doing that in a way where I think it's a bit more sustainable. The build-up, they're looking for the space, working through into the space, and then doing their tempo shifts. Whereas with Manchester United, it felt to me like they were doing the opposite. They're sort of trying to force those tempo shifts with hero balls, right? So part of the reason why Casemiro is finding himself under pressure is because he doesn't have the build-up structure around him to make those more sustainable attacks that Liverpool are making, right? So the first goal they gave away was essentially they built through, he got the ball, and then he looked up and he was trying to find whoever was in the left-hand channel, and instead played it to Gravenberch, who then set up the first goal. Now, you can argue that's the same sort of tactic as what Liverpool are trying to do. But you can also argue that I think that they're doing it in a much less sustainable way because the passes that they're having to make are much higher risk than the passes that Liverpool are having to make. So again, it comes down to, yes, there's plenty of areas for them to improve in, but the tactical blueprint that's there is not a million miles away from the tactical blueprint of a team which we're talking about as being incredibly successful so far this season. So there's lots of little coaching details in there. We've done a Saturday show. We've done a show that's coming out on Saturday, and one of the things I analysed in that was a moment where Casemiro is defending, and it goes completely wrong, and Manchester United and Liverpool have a really big chance out of it. And then 2 minutes later, the same situation where he's defending and does everything right, and Manchester United end up with an attacking situation coming out of it. So it's super hard. In football, there's no hard and fast conclusions because it's easy off the back of a 3-0 loss to Man United to say everything they're doing is bad and everything Liverpool is doing is good. But actually, the truth is far closer than I think a lot of people want to accept, that both these teams are trying to do very similar things. They've got different levels of players available to them. Some of those players are playing better or worse than others. You can argue about whether or not one coach is better at getting the tactical ideas across so that for example, out of possession structure works better for one than the other. But the reality is that there are a lot of tactical similarities between the two.
Let's talk about a player that did perform well. You mentioned him a couple of moments ago, Ryan Gravenberch for Liverpool. Key in the midfield in that performance at Old Trafford. Here's the Athletics Liverpool writer James Pearce on that performance.
In terms of dealing with everything that he's been presented with so far, and in the context of Liverpool missing out on Zubimendi and everyone thinking, oh my God, this could be the area where Liverpool have really found wanting. Gravenberch has been an absolute revelation. He won every tackle he went in for, 4 interceptions. I think it was 7 out of 10 he won in terms of his duels, and obviously we know Slot. I think it was Ipswich, wasn't it? He talked then about you've got to win your duels, you've got to have that physical edge in games. And he's given Liverpool that, as well as probably what we knew he had as well in his locker, which is that creative spark and fantastic passing range.
I suppose it's a sign of a team that's been prepared well over the summer, Tim, that he's slotted into a different type of role.
We're just using the verb slot all the time of Liverpool.
Oh, I didn't even realise I'd said it. Did I say slot a lot there? I didn't even realise. I'm sorry. But yes, he has slotted in well into a new role under Slot rather than Klopp. And good for him to have a dominant performance when there were those questions, as James mentioned, of players that they missed out on over the summer.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, they went hard for Martin Zubimendi from Real Sociedad, and clearly they felt that there was a need to fill that position. But you've got to say, it's the exact opposite approach to someone like Chelsea, who would just go next on their list and try and sign them, right? So, and Liverpool have done this in the past. They've been principled in the way that they work in the transfer market, very clear on targets, and not necessarily bringing in players that they don't think will fit the system. So clearly they're carrying that on, even though they've got a new head coach. And I guess there's a slight concern in terms of depth there in midfield, but they've got the numbers. I think you sort of add up. They've got like 5-6 midfielders in Endo, Gravenberch, Szoboszlai, McAllister, Curtis Jones, Harvey Elliott can drop deeper as well. And then Tyler Morton might be one who sort of steps up this season. By Leverkusen, we're keen to sign him a couple of weeks ago, which sort of suggests we haven't seen much of him, but apart from the Championship, but that suggests the calibre of player that he is. So I think it's a really bold. We look at. I don't want to pick on Chelsea, but Chelsea's approach is just so different and so eye-catching. But Liverpool's is in a way to not sign anyone other than a backup forward. It's pretty brave. They've got the money to bring the players in. They've got a new manager or a new head coach with a remit to say, look, I want to refresh this, but he hasn't. He's playing the longer game, and the early results are really promising.
I think it's quite an interesting juxtaposition in this game as well between the way that Manchester United dealt with the end of a dynasty and a dynastic coach leaving, and we're over 10 years on after that, and they still haven't seemed to get the process right. Whereas with Liverpool, they can make that shift in part because of the process, right? The fact that they don't panic in the market and they have a clear idea about the identity of football they want to play and the sort of players and managers who they want to enact that on the pitch means that they can absorb those kind of losses of one of the best coaches of all time. I think that's what's so fascinating about this, that people will talk about it as if it's all to do with the manager Slot coming in and doing this, but so much of it is to do with the processes being in place that you can absorb that kind of bump in the road.
Yeah, he's obviously left them in very good shape, but it also maybe suggests that maybe it was the right time for Klopp to leave. If the players were all devastated that he was gone and didn't want to play for anyone else, I think we'd be seeing that in the early performances, because we have seen in the past with Moyes replacing Fergie and Emery replacing Wenger how difficult it can be immediately. So that kind he'd said himself he was very tired, Klopp. So maybe the players had felt that, and maybe they felt it was time for a new voice as well.
I think he was recognising as well that he was in danger of becoming a bit too much of a figure at the club, in the same way that Ferguson or Wenger did, where suddenly, last season it felt like Klopp was starting to actually influence the recruitment again. We saw Michael Edwards had gone last summer, and a few people Ian Graham left from the data department, and it felt almost as though Liverpool moving a bit too close to the sun here and going back to. And it's so dangerous not to do that, right? Because when you have someone like Klopp who is a figurehead, it's so easy to just defer all decisions to them. And I think it's quite instructive that Klopp decided to leave, and now they brought it back in Michael Edwards as the sporting director. And I think they're moving back to that kind of model where it's like Slot's a head coach, right, rather than a manager. And I think that's important as well.
Yeah, and also to acknowledge the fact that Klopp was very honest in the fact that he just said, like, I've run out of gas. I need a breather, which is maybe something that you could look at over Stanley Park and think Sean Dyche could probably do with a breather at Everton, considering their start. They've started with 3 defeats, heavy defeats against Brighton, against Tottenham, and then a capitulation against Bournemouth in the final 9 minutes, I think it was. Do you worry for Everton, considering what has happened and the fact that they've started in exactly the same way as they did last campaign, and also the way that Sean Dyche is actually talking about it? He did basically say that the players should have managed that situation better. Sort of, almost moving the blame towards the players rather than himself.
Yeah, I'm not worried, Adam.
No.
But
would you be concerned if you were an Everton supporter? And look, they wear their hearts on the sleeve, and they've got used to booing and throwing verbal volleys at their own team at home over the last couple of seasons. But it's happening again. It's sort of Groundhog Day.
Yeah, definitely. There's Everton. Obviously, that's their last season at Goodison Park. I don't know if you saw, but they stuck a tweet out at the start of the season saying, "Oh, we really want to share this, pictorially with our fans.
Yeah.
So send us your pictures of the last season at Goodison Park." It's too early to say in terms of are there going to be 3 teams weaker than them. Nothing's really settled on with the new promoted teams yet. But I think the big problem for Everton is if things aren't working, what do they change? They had 14 players, I think, last week. It's not like they've got a depthy squad. They're not going to go out and sign a lot of players in January. And if they're in a relegation scrap, you probably want Sean Dyche as manager. So if this is it for the rest of the season, then you'd be worried because statistically, you've got to say that was one of the worst Premier League defeats of all time. Because no team has ever been 2-0 up later and lost, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, that's true.
But the capitulation, they were completely in control. I mean, Iraola said after the game that, look, Everton basically deserved to win it. Not that they did because they lost, but you know what I mean. They were completely in control. So it also could have been 4 or 5. They were in utter disarray. Mm-hmm. They were just the defences had no shape whatsoever. They were all completely panicking and relying on Jordan Pickford for a couple more good saves. So yeah, I'd if I was a worrying kind of guy, I'd be worried, Adam.
I do recommend listening to the episode this week that focused on the Everton situation with Matt Slater, with Paddy Boyland, and also with Phil Hay alongside Ayak and Waleri. If you want to sort of maybe feel better about how your club is situated at the moment, because it is a real mess at Everton on and off the field, to be brutally honest, because there's lots of stuff that needs to be sorted out, and we're not enjoying it because it's tough for the Everton fans to have gone through this, and it's out of their control with especially the ownership situation. But yeah, I mean, on the pitch, John, defensively they've looked all over the shop, and that's a worry, especially from a Sean Dyche side.
Yeah, and weird. If you look at the numbers last season, they were very much a mid-table side. I mean, they were nothing special. But I've just looked at the numbers now, and this season they're putting up half an expected goal less per game, and they're conceding half a goal more in terms of expected numbers. So essentially, that's a 1-goal swing, right? So that you can't sustain that kind of swing. And expect not to be in a relegation battle. I suppose the good thing here is that we're only 3 games into the season, so you do have to take that with a pinch of salt. But in terms of what's happening on the pitch, I mean, they've lost Amadou Onana, who is a player who went for £50 million, and a lot of people thought would make the step up to it, maybe an even the elite level, like proper Champions League challenging side. Didn't happen, but is that kind of level of player, and you lose a player like that and replace them with Tim Mirabunam, and that is just it is a step down, despite I think Mirabunam being impressive so far, given the context that he's come in. So yeah, you can't sustain like a drop of quality like that without seeing issues. And I think the Premier League now has become, I think in the bottom half has become, you can be teams who have very solid structures and good coaches, but you still need to have those difference makers. And losing someone like Onana, I think, who is a difference maker at that level, can have a knock-on effect.
But also, not refreshing. The team has still got Seamus Coleman right back. I know he's a loyal stalwart, but he made some bad errors.
He was covering for Ashley Young, right? It's like,
exactly.
It's not even depth.
Everton fans most of them will tell you shouldn't be anywhere near the team, Ashley Young. And then you got Michael Keane, who's still there. I know they're missing Jared Branthwaite at the moment, but I think Kieran Trippier was perhaps an option on deadline day, but not the kind of thing that they can do financially. So, yeah, like I said, what do they do in January? How do they fix this with personnel? They probably can't.
They're going to have Armando Broja to come into the side when he's fit. Also, in terms of difference makers, Iliman Ndiaye has actually, he did have a good game against Bournemouth. So there is sort of positivity there, and maybe, yes, as you mentioned, we are only 3 games into the season, so maybe we shouldn't be going too hard in on Everton, but I would have thought that the fans are thinking, right, come on, we can't go through this.
But it's that kind of club. It kind of invites itself into this sort of spiral where, with the
especially if you can't refresh the team as well.
Yeah, but it's this sort of apocalyptic sort of feel. They all latch onto it quite quickly, and it's a cultural thing at the club.
Yeah. Do you think that they sort of thrive? I mean, I know that Sean Dyche has this record of starting seasons off badly, but last season it felt as though that points deduction really motivated them and gave them steel. I don't know whether or not Dyche finds it easier as a coach to motivate his players when you can have that underdog. Everything's going against us. Let's get fired up and make the difference here. Do you think that?
Yeah, but I think from his point of view as well, when he first went there, yes, he was in a bit of a firefighting situation, but he also wanted to go there and prove that he wasn't just a firefighting manager that can keep an unfashionable side in the top division. So I would have thought that
it's been tough for him, though,
he's getting frustrated. It has been tough, of course.
No one would want to be in that context, given the difficulty off the field and the ownership disputes.
No, it's true.
I was really disappointed that the interviewer didn't ask him on Saturday about Oasis tickets, because they had, after the Carabao Cup win over Doncaster in midweek, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm really excited."
That was good.
No, you were really, really excited.
Yeah, I really enjoy Oasis.
It wasn't the time nor the place.
No, but you've got
to do it.
Surely, go on. Yeah, would have been funny.
Anyway, so we've mentioned, and hopefully for Everton fans, it does sort of turn around and they can pull away from the bottom and not have an entire season in the relegation battle. Let's hear from our data writer Mark Carey on at what point the Premier League table begins to reflect the final standings.
Everyone is understandably excited about the first 3 weeks of the Premier League season, but as a data analyst, my role is to cut through the noise and focus on those hard, cold facts. And the fact is that we really can't read too much into the Premier League table at all after the first 3 games. I mean, with such limited information and a few shock results along the way, I think it's nearly impossible to base any strong conclusions at this stage of the season. You might be able to still spot some interesting tactical patterns that might show a change in a team's approach in or out of possession, but my advice would be to steer clear of the numbers for the time being. As a nice round figure, the table does tend to truly take shape after about 10 games of the season, and there's research to back that up as well. So this was shown by a 2019 study that looked at match data from 1995 to 2017. And in the Premier League, the researchers found that 77% of the statistical variance in the final league standings was explained by match week 10. So essentially, there was a notable, strong relationship between the league table after 10 games and at the end of the season. And looking back at last season, that was certainly the case when looking at the table after 10 weeks. Manchester City, Liverpool and Arsenal were in the top 4. Luton, Burnley and Sheffield United were in the relegation zone, and most teams in between were pretty much where they ended up. I think the only exception was Tottenham Hotspur's fast start to the season that saw them top of the table after 10 games, and Chelsea's slower start to the season that saw them lose 4 games in their opening 10 before obviously climbing up to a stronger finish by the end. So look, we can have some fun with some early season quirks after 3 games of the season, but please promise me, don't read too much into the numbers for a few more weeks.
Oh, my kids have just gone back to school, and I felt like I've just been told off by a teacher. Don't go into too much conclusive detail about the first 3 games of the season. But
I liked his soundtrack, though. Did you?
It was nice. It was good.
Does when he walks around and talks to people, is that just what happens?
Yeah, it does. It does. Just gives it a little bit of extra heft, doesn't it? Well, it's good news for Everton fans, at the very least, to hear from Mark Carey there saying, look, just don't worry, chill out. You may well be okay. Obviously, Manchester City, you can be pretty confident. They are top of the table now. They'll probably still be there at the end of the season. We've spoken about Haaland. He's been covered in detail everywhere. Another hat-trick for him last weekend at West Ham. 8 hat-tricks in his Premier League career, and that's the joint 4th highest in the division's all-time record, alongside who do you know who they are? Do you know who the other ones are alongside Haaland?
The goal scorer.
Yeah. Who's got who is he joint with? alongside?
Thierry Henry
Yeah.
is one of them.
Yeah, for hat-tricks, sorry.
Yeah, for hat-tricks, yeah.
Shearer?
No, Shearer's got
No.
more, I think.
Thierry Henry, Harry Kane, and Michael Owen as well. It's his 11th in a Manchester City shirt. Let's step away from Haaland, and I should be calling him Haaland, shouldn't I, really?
You can call him what you like.
Okay. Well, no, I wouldn't. He's massive. But away from him, has Pep adjusted anything that we should be sort of surprised with, or just sort of noting down and thinking, actually they've taken another step forward, which will make them even more impregnable?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing, I think, the biggest factor is probably him. Mark has just told us off. I'm going to talk about some of the numbers because last season was, I think, the first season on record where Haaland has actually underperformed his expected numbers. So he was putting up around an expected goal a game, I think, in the Premier League last season, and he was slightly under that, so it's like 0.95 actual goals. So only very, very, I mean, we're being picky here. I noticed so far he's basically double. If you look at non-penalty expected goals and non-penalty goals, he's putting up one expected non-penalty expected goals, similar to last season. He's scoring 2, so he's basically doubled his output in terms of actual goals. So that's the biggest factor here, I think, that for whatever reason his finishing is better. And you may remember last season I took quite an interest in Haaland's shot timings. Just looking at I watched every shot he took and I timed the difference between his first touch and the shot and tried to have a think about whether or not there was commonalities and what was going on. I've done the same for this season, just keeping an eye on it. And one thing I've noticed, I mean, again, the sample size is tiny, so there's a massive caveat there. I noticed that his shot timing is actually, one of the things I said is he's great because he gets shots away so quickly. If you think of that, it's the West Ham goal where he receives the ball and then takes a shot and batters it into the top corner. It's like 0.25 seconds. So, it's about the same amount of time it takes to blink. He receives the ball on the edge of the box and then clacks it in over the keeper really hard. He hits that so hard with basically no backspin, backlift with his leg. It's just remarkably quick, and that's one of the reasons why he's a great striker, because he can do that in a way that no one else can, and the goalkeepers obviously aren't set and defences aren't set, so it just speeds things up. But actually, almost at every other chance he's had, it's been about slowing it down, and in part that is because there's been a lot of chances that have been created for him by him running in behind. So they play the ball in, he takes a few touches to get to the goal and then scores. So there's a couple in the Ipswich game, there's a couple in the West Ham game as well. And I do think that in part is to do with Guardiola's new little tweak where he's getting Kevin De Bruyne to shift out into the wide area just in front of the fullback. The goal against Ipswich, I think it's maybe the first one where the ball goes out wide to De Bruyne, he clips it over the top to Haaland, he takes a little head past the goalkeeper and chips it in. That is a tactical tweak, I think, that we're going to start seeing more goals coming from as well. One other thing, they've changed their out of possession shape as well. They used to press out of a 4-4-2, so it would be Haaland and De Bruyne next to him in the front line. They're now pressing out of a 4-1-4-1, so Haaland's on his own, but then the 2-8s often jump up behind him, so they end up in that sort of 4-4-2 shape a lot of the time. But I think that it means that you're getting Bernardo Silva and Kevin De Bruyne around Haaland a lot more in those out of possession phases. So if they win the ball, he's just on the last line and they're able to play the balls through to him as well. So again, working on getting the ball into that space behind, which he's obviously lethal from too. So I think that there are tactical tweaks here. Also, Pep's talked about him working much harder on his finishing, and we're seeing the fruits of that as well in the numbers.
Right, let's concentrate on Tottenham now. And over on our Spurs podcast, View from the Lane, Jack Pitt-Brooke spoke to Danny Kelly about the fine lines between winning and losing under Ange Postecoglou's style of football.
Ange Ball is a house of cards. Like, it's beautiful, but if one bit is off, the whole thing collapses. And this, I think, is
You
the
say
problem.
that, Jack, my friend, as though that's acceptable.
Well, no, I'm not saying whether this is good or bad. I'm just saying what I think. So I think Ange Ball's a house of cards. One bit is off, the whole thing collapses. And so Spurs playing this way can work, but it can only work if they don't make a single mistake. They leave themselves zero room for error. They set themselves such a high bar to win a game playing this way, and they need to be able to execute every single time, and at the moment they're not executing every single time.
So they've drawn against Leicester, they hammered Everton 4-0, and then they lost against Newcastle. It's interesting there, and Danny was basically sticking a flag in the fact that that's not sustainable, is it? If as Jack is saying, if one thing is out, it all goes to shizzle. That needs to be adapted, does it not, Tim?
I mean, he's not going to do that. I think we saw time and again last year when things are going wrong, he'll stick with his principles. I'm surprised they didn't do more different summer business. They signed a lot of young players: Odebear, Archie Gray, Bergvall from Sweden. These guys aren't going to be first team regulars. They spent more than half their budget on Dominic Solanke, and I know we haven't seen him yet, which is an important thing to say. But otherwise, it's the same team as last year. So yeah, they were in a real rut towards the end of last season, particularly defensively. Again, a really bad defensive record. There were definitely issues with sort of team dynamics and team pressing, for sure. I think if and when it clicks, they can hit a really high level. I think there's a really high ceiling there, and I think they've got a really good manager in place who, if given sort of 3, 4, 5 years with the right backing in the transfer market, can really do something in terms of take them up to the level that Arsenal and Liverpool are currently at. They're just going to need a bit of patience, I think. But I'm surprised they didn't do more in the window. They look to the future, but not so much the present.
So Ange has got a lot of credit in the bank, seemingly with Tim, and everyone should just sort of stick with it and not get frustrated by it. Are you on that page as well, John?
I guess as an analyst, I look at it, I understand the arguments that this is sort of very binary football. It's like it's either really, really good or really, really bad in moments. I suppose for me, I think the thing that I notice is that there's little details where I think if Spurs improved, it would have a massive impact on whether or not they are actually a house of cards, right? And you take one card out and everything falls down. So, for example, the second goal they conceded. There's lots of talk about that as though this is just what Ange Postecoglou wants, right? It's like Maddison steams in to Joelinton, doesn't get the challenge. Joelinton rolls him, and now you're in a scenario where you've got a guy on the ball with space in front of him, basically a back line in front of him, holes in that back line, and fast runners in behind. And I think that the problem with viewing it in that sort of binary way of being like, it's my way or the highway for Ange, is that there are areas where they could play that way, I think, and improve. There are coaching decisions that can be made where, so for example, Romero's position in both of the goals, I think there's things you can do slightly differently there that make it much more sustainable as a way of defending. But I think that the conversation now has gone so much towards, on the one hand, everyone's saying, this is a really exciting way of attacking, and it's going to be really, if they get it right, it's going to be really productive. And on the other hand, it's like, well, it's a really risky way of defending, and so you make one mistake and then you concede. And I just think that there is a middle space which isn't compromising of his ideals, and that is making sure that you don't end up in these sorts of scenarios. Like the first goal as well, Romero presses out really aggressively, and that's fine. You can play with an aggressive pressing system like that. The problem is that Romero then takes forever to get back, and Bissouma takes its place, and Romero sees himself deferred of any responsibility to do what Bissouma should have been doing in that situation. And again, it leads to a goal. And I think those are the things that I worry about with Postecoglou. It's like the little details. I think that when you focus so much on the idealism and being like, you go again. There was a pre-season game where against I think it was the Korean All-Stars team, where Spurs played badly in the first half, and there was a drinks break, and Postecoglou came on and was just basically shouting at them, telling them to press. He wasn't telling them how to press better, or the details of pressing. It was more, you've got to go for this. You've got to be up for it, and you've got to fight the whole time. And I think it's an important way of playing. But for me, what's often missing are the details. So Maddison steaming in, as we've said. Okay, great, you've done what the manager wants you there, but maybe if you hold your run a little bit more and you press a little bit less passionately, you don't get rolled quite so easily by Joelinton. And I think sometimes with Ange, it feels like the details are passion and intensity, and we this is what we do, and we go out and we go again. And sometimes somewhere in between that, they've lost some of the details where I think you can actually improve them to a level where you're still playing the same way, but you're making less of these mistakes that result in goals, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. It makes complete sense, but it also makes me think that there are deficiencies in what they're being coached. And if he's not got the depth to actually acknowledge that, one, in public, or two, on the training field, and adapt it, then that would be worrying to me, if that is correct.
Evolution is super important for coaches. There's a Rodri interview actually in the Players Tribune today, which I recommend people go and read because it's great, and it I learned a lot about Rodri that I didn't expect to learn. He's very different to what I expected him to be. But he has a line in there where he talks about Pep Guardiola and says the reason Pep's great is because he's always evolving. Like, even when things go well one season, he's like, we've got to change the next season because all of their analysts are going to be looking at what we did this season and finding ways of stopping it. And that's what I worry about with Postecoglou. Because he's so idealistic. He's like, we can't change anything because we have to believe in the project and the process. And that means that sometimes I feel as though he might not have the ability then to go out and be like, okay, this bit didn't work, let's change it. Having said that, they're better at defending set pieces than they were last season. So I think some of that stuff must be rhetorical. It must just be, I've got to have the players believing in the system, and then we slowly drip feed them these evolutions in the system. So yeah.
Let's switch on to Chelsea now, and they've started the season with a loss, a really, really big win, impressive win against Wolves, and then most recently a draw. Let's hear from Simon Johnson speaking on Straight Outta Cobham.
How do we assess the first few weeks of the season? Well, not taking enough chances, not keeping clean sheets. That's 4 of the 5 games without a clean sheet, and they were quite fortunate to keep one against Servette. So clearly work to do at both ends of the pitch, and that's exactly what we were saying last season. So progress, what progress? Early days, but you have to say at the start of the season so far there's much room for improvement.
So it's not particularly convincing as far as Simon is concerned. I mean, you've mentioned earlier on in the show, Tim, about the strategy that they've got with all the signings, etc., etc. But they can't keep on starting every season with it being, we've transitioned to a new head coach, we're doing something different. It's a sort of a work in progress constantly, because people just gradually, it's just a drip, drip, drip of people just losing any faith in that process of it being a work in progress. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it used to work for them when they were at a slightly higher level and winning leagues and able to attract better players, and they would change their head coach every year and didn't seem to make a huge amount of difference to how many trophies they won. But now, they're in a bit of a rut recruitment-wise, where they're just constantly on a huge revolving door of talented players, changing the head coach. I remember us saying in sort of February, March, when Pochettino had finally sort of started to crack it, and they only lost once in the last sort of 3 or 4 months of the season, and then it seemed like a bit of fine-tuning in the summer with the same guy, and they could look forward with some optimism and some consistency. But then I say they ripped it up and started again. I mean, they certainly have with the head coach, but if you looked at the team last week, there's only one new face in there, which is Pedro Neto, although you would expect a couple more, like João Felix maybe, to come into the team, maybe Dewsbury Hall at some point. But
Jadon Sancho,
yeah, there's a long list. And yeah, the fact that they've left some of their best players out of the Conference League squad this week, I know it's a far less priority for them, but it just shows this sort of gluttonous aspect of how many players they've got. So yeah, when does it stop sort of being a work in progress and becomes something more coherent? We're looking at months down the line, I think. That's if you're going to keep changing the players and the head coach, what else do you expect?
Right, let's talk about some other teams that have caught our attention so far. It's been interesting. Obviously, we saw Ivan Toney last week heading out to Saudi Arabia. He's not going to be playing in the Premier League anymore, but it doesn't seem to bother Thomas Frank. Brentford have started well. The post-Toney era is now 3 games old because he's not featured for them this season. Have you been impressed with how they've started, how they've evolved, perhaps?
Yeah, I think a lot of people expected them to be maybe relegation candidates this season for various reasons. The Toney stuff, Bernardo Cueva going to Chelsea, and that being a big, he was a set-piece coach, so that was a big part of their identity, finding those marginal gains. But yeah, they've hit the ground running really well. A couple of wins under their belt already, and yeah, a front 3, I would say, who look pretty good to go. So Brian Mbeumo, everyone's been impressed with him since he's been in the Premier League, but Jan Wissa has become, I think, a really good striker at that level, and Kevin Schade, who arrived from Freiburg, was in and out last season because of injuries. But yeah, I think we talked before with Everton about difference makers, and I think that front line is good enough at the level to keep them up. So I've been pretty impressed with them so far.
What have you made, Tim, of Southampton? Because obviously they've come up with a very clear identity. They want to pass out from the back. They want to keep the ball as much as they can, and then score their goals with nice moves. Russell Martin's already been accused of being too stubborn. What's your take on it?
No. It's a successful way of playing. Last year, they have got an identity. They've averaged 68% possession in their 3 matches, but an XG of only 3.4 so far, which they'll obviously need to improve on. But I've actually been really impressed with a lot of the business they've done over the summer. They've brought in about 20 players, but I guess they felt they needed to, and that's going to take a serious amount of time to fit together. A lot of them have gone under radar, the players they brought in. I didn't realise they brought Adam Lallana back. You know when you're on your holidays and you miss, when you see him on Adam Lallana.
Yeah.
Southampton, they brought him back. They brought Ryan Fraser back. Signed Maxwell Cornet, Cameron Archer. They got Flynn Downs from West Ham. And Ben Brereton Diaz for about 6-7 million. Could be the signing of the season in terms of money to goals. Because he scored something like 6 in 14 for an absolutely dreadful Sheffield United team last season, and he's got something about him. So I think, look, it's Russell Martin's first time in the Premier League. Obviously, it's so hard in the Premier League when you've got like Emery joining a relegation threatened team, or Lopetegui coming in. These are Europa League winning managers, or Oliver Glasner, mid-table teams. These are very intelligent. Tactically minded coaches with very clear identities. That's what you're competing with. It's so tough. So to say, look, 3 games, you need to rip it all up and start again. No, absolutely not. Keep going, Russell.
Okay, so Southampton aren't going to end up like Burnley last season, where Vincent Kompany was potentially too stubborn, stuck to his principles too much. And you have to answer this in short, because I'm sure you could wax lyrical about this for hours, because it's basically going against every fibre of your body for some dinosaur saying, no, you got to get it long, rather than playing the ball out.
I think that Southampton will get relegated playing this way. I think it's also important to distinguish between playing possession-heavy football and playing bad possession-heavy football.
Okay.
And I think,
and they're doing
from
that,
what I've seen, there's things that I see them doing that I think is just madness.
But is that personnel? Is that bad players? Not bad players. Sorry, players making bad decisions, and they're maybe not going to evolve enough to make better decisions over the course of a season.
Yeah, I think structurally they do stuff that I look at and I don't really understand why they're doing it. So I'm all with Tim for saying managers should have principles, they should stick to their ideas. But I also think if you have, same as what we were saying with Ange, if there's issues with it and details that can be changed and improved, they need to be made. And if the manager is not making them because of stubbornness, then you're not helping anyone.
So I'm counting Russell Martin as one of the new bosses in the Premier League. Obviously, with him, Kieran McKenna and Steve Cooper, even though we are familiar with who they are, but they are new bosses into the Premier League. New boss at Brighton, obviously, and at West Ham as well. Anyone sort of stood out for you in terms of the most impressive adapter to the Premier League? Who would you pick?
I mean, I think it's hard not to talk about Fabian Herzl at Brighton, just because this is a guy who basically took over at a club in the Zweite Bundesliga midway through the season, a relegation troubled club, and then turned it around and then got them promoted the following season, and has come in at Brighton and hit the ground running. Again, we talked at the top of the show about Arne Slot at Liverpool, and a big reason why a manager like Herzl can come in and do well is because Brighton have that process in place to be able to get a manager who takes the squad and embraces the game model. And I think what I've been impressed with about him is that he's had that capacity to adapt, because I've watched games that he played with St. Pauli in the Zweite Bundesliga last season. Is very different, not very different, but it's notably different from what he was doing last season. What he's doing this season looks a lot more similar to what Roberto De Zerbi was doing at Brighton as well. And I think that's what always impresses me, the manager who's able to come in and fit a different game model without necessarily just throwing the baby out with the bathwater as well for his own principles. So, but again, that's part of the process, right? They've brought in a manager who they think can do that, and he has come in and done that. And that's the holy grail, I guess, of running a successful football club.
And he is a baby himself, isn't he?
He is, yeah.
Only 31 years old. Quick word on Arsenal to you, Tim, finally. Before, and this is a surprise for you, we've got a quiz coming up.
Woohoo!
Yeah, thank you. Quick word on Arsenal, because we are going to concentrate on Arsenal quite a lot over the coming weeks. They've got the North London derby coming up. We've got City against Arsenal as well. But do you see them being the closest challengers to City once again? Nothing sort of made you think that they're not going to be able to sustain a challenge?
No.
Okay, good. Would you want me to get on with the quiz? Yeah. That probably does it. Should we just do the quiz?
Yeah.
You can talk more about Arsenal.
I'd like to leave it at that. I think it's funnier.
Okay, fine. Let's leave it at that.
Next week.
Right. Let's get into a quiz. Basically, we're going to look at the first 3 match weeks of the season, and I'm going to ask you some questions, and you have to tell me maybe the top 3 in these various different categories. And I'm going to be treading into your territory here, John. So don't laugh at me if I use the wrong terminology or anything like that, okay? So what we're going to do is I'm going to ask you the question. You have to fire the answers at me, and we'll see who gets the most.
Well,
right.
It's a very standard kind of quiz then.
It's a quiz. Basically, I ask the question, you try and give me the answer.
I've got that. You got that?
Okay.
Got it. Yeah.
Okay, here we go. We are going to start with non-penalty XG.
Oh, nice.
Okay, so I want to know who has the highest non-penalty XG.
As in the
Player
team.
or team?
The team. I thought this would be on the tip of your tongue.
Man City.
No.
Liverpool.
Liverpool.
It must be Liverpool. They put up 2.5 against 2 teams. So
Liverpool are correct. 6.9.
Immediately feeling like I'm at a big disadvantage.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
For the guy who can reel off XG per game. Right.
Non-penalty XG, Liverpool is first. Do you know who is second? You did mention them.
Man City.
Man City second.
again,
Who is third?
Someone surprising by the tone of your voice.
Yeah.
Ooh, is it Brighton?
No, it's not Brighton.
It's not Bournemouth, is it?
It is Bournemouth.
There we
It's
go.
your Bournemouth, John. It's your Bournemouth. 5.8. Lowest non-penalty XG.
Oh, I know this is Ipswich.
It is Ipswich. 1.2. And I was saying non-penalty XG because how many penalties have we had so far this season? How many penalties have we had?
5.
None.
No.
No penalties.
No, we've had 2 penalties, and Manchester City did score one of them. Who scored the other one? Have you watched any football?
I just zone out for penalties. They're not important, are they?
Paquetá scored for West Ham. Okay. It's all right. It will get better, this quiz. Now, this is XG against.
Right.
Okay? Who has got the lowest?
No, it's not.
Arsenal.
Depends which model you're
No,
looking
it's
at.
not Arsenal.
Liverpool were low, but I don't think they were the lowest. Is it City?
It is City with 2. Who has the most?
Wolves.
Ipswich.
No, not Wolves.
No, you had that.
Is it not
you had that-
Ipswich.
you had that
Ipswich
looking
is
right.
correct. 6.8. Now, this is a bit more tricky.
I mean, I'm not finding it easy so far.
This is a bit more tricky. Now, I want to know the non-penalty XG deficit. So those who have overperformed and those who have underperformed. Okay? Who has been our top overperformer in terms of their XG numbers and the amount of goals that they have scored?
Chelsea.
Chelsea is correct. Yes. Well done.
I know that Burnley hold that title in the Championship because they scored 9 goals from 2 XG in their first 3 games.
Well, there you go.
Which is crazy, right?
Are you looking for bonus points?
That's Scott. Yeah,
I'm just showing
it's
off.
the Championship. And finally, most yellow cards.
Combative.
Arsenal had loads in that Brighton game.
Yes, exactly. With 10, the least yellow cards.
How many of them were deserved, Adam? How many of them were deserved?
Exactly. Least yellows.
Who's really nice?
Who should be maybe putting their foot in a little
Man
bit
United.
more? No, Everton. So there you go. A little quiz for you just to pull out a few numbers from the opening 3 match days of the season. Thank you very much for taking part, Tim.
Thanks. I did so reluctantly, but sort of, found
You
my
had a
feet.
better back half of the quiz than the front half,
Yeah,
didn't you?
I enjoyed that, Adam.
You looked like you were a new kid at secondary school at the beginning.
I'm like Russell Martin at Southampton. Just give him time.
Sean
Give
Dyche,
him
aren't you?
time, exactly.
The Sean Dyche, he thrive under adversity.
Yes, exactly.
Absolutely.
He had a points deduction and it spurred him on.
Exactly. He reacted to the situation. He evolved rather than revolved. And thanks to you, John.
Yeah, thanks. I
Cool.
had fun.
Yeah, it was good fun. Just a reminder, all the podcasts that you can listen to on the Athletic FC, you've got the Tactics Pod, Totally Football Show, you've got the Daily Football Briefing as well, all the club shows too, so get stuck into those during this international break. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back on Monday. Have a lovely weekend. Take care.
If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search the Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.